And then the last component of any ordinance is the relocation benefits. So I don't believe we heard consensus relative to what's in the existing ordinance versus the mayor's proposal that it not be essentially not be a sliding scale, and it would be the 4 months relocation benefit, the value of the cash benefit, or the 4 months in addition to the 30 or the 60-day notice, regardless of the length of tenure. So I don't think we heard consensus on that.
My hope is that however we structure it, somehow we account for the smaller landlords. I mean, I hear people when they say we should treat, we shouldn't have different classes of tenants. But the world in which we live in Alameda, there are indeed small mom and pop landlords, and it would be difficult to recover these costs. So somehow, in figuring out what the right relocation formula is, that we have to take that into account.
Vice Mayor.
I think to accommodate that, that's why I'm for having an extended period of time so that there's effectively the 4 months on top of the 60 days. And then any other benefit would be a matter of mediation between the landlord and the tenant.
So you would not do the tie it to the length of tenancy?
That's correct.
Okay, so next.
Well, let me also make sure to clarify. What I mean is that when staff comes back, I just want to make sure that I hear part of the report. This is how we dealt with the issue of the small landlords in the context of the relocation benefit. It might be altogether possible that one of your summary conclusions is that we couldn't do much, but at least I want to see that you guys thought that through.
Member Odie?
I mean, I'm kind of against any special exception. I mean, if you're doing OMI, whether you're 1, 2, 4, 6.
What about tying it to length of tenancy, though? Where are you now?
I mean, I could, if we don't have 3 votes to do what staff wants to do, and we get 3 votes to tie it, to do what you proposed, I mean, that's fine too. I just don't think we should have any exceptions.
Okay, so I'm fine with no exceptions. I said don't tie it to length of tenancy. Vice Mayor agreed with me. Where do you want to come down on this thing?
I like the staff recommendation too.
I could go either way, I mean, because it's 2 to 2 then, right? So don't tie it to length of tenancy and basically say everyone gets the same relocation, whether they've been there a year. I mean, the reality, let's look at it practically again. If we do the 1-year lease, basically everyone's going to have an opportunity to be there more than 1 year.
So for me, one of the concerns is actually, I think it encourages, if you tie it to length of tenancy, it actually discourages longer-term tenants.
So that,
Whereas if you don't, then it does not impact that.
So
There's not a disincentive for having a longer-term tenant.
How does it discourage?
but isn't that what
long-term
staff
to pay more.
does? Ties it
Or
to,
offer more months. And I don't want to discourage long-term tenancy.
You don't
I
want to
want
discourage
more stability.
landlords from giving people?
so
I want to treat everyone the same.
you want to treat everyone the same. I mean, I could go with that if
Well,
staff report doesn't have 3 votes, I can go with that also.
my sense is that the fair thing is that starting off the process, it should be tied to tenancy, starting off the process, but however many months or years into it, then we should have a set amount. Because it's kind of not fair if a tenant comes in and is only there for 1 or 2 months and suddenly they're eligible, and maybe for right or wrong reasons, but they're eligible for 4 months rent plus $1,500.
No, it's notice, 4 months notice, so that they have longer time to try to find an alternative housing or money. But it's really longer notice to address the 30, 60-day notices.
No, the ordinance says that you get 1 month's rent for each year that you've been there. And I actually think it would be unfair to burden landlords with having to pay that 4 months rent, even for a tenant who's just been there a year. And I too would like to see longer tenancies encouraged, but I think landlords would tell you that they would like good tenants to stay longer because there is that cost we've talked about finding a new tenant, getting the unit ready
Okay,
to
I'm going
be
to send this
rented
back
again.
to staff. Can you clarify, because that's not my understanding. When I read this proposal, it says relocation reduced 1 month rent for each month stay tied to. That it's-
Right.
So staff, can you explain, if you don't tie it to tenancy, if you do the 6 months and how the play between the 6 months and the rent, the amount?
So the ordinance says that your relocation benefit is equal to the value of your monthly rent up to a maximum of 4 months rent. And you can basically exchange out that monetary compensation in exchange for more time. So that if you wanted to stay 2 months longer, let's say you lived there 10 years, under this ordinance, you'd be eligible for 4 months cash equivalent, the cash equivalent of 4 months rent. You could, and you wanted to stay 2 additional months, you would then get 2 months time plus 2 months cash equivalent relocation benefit.
Plus 1,500.
Plus 1,500 moving expense. So that's yeah, you trade time for money up to a maximum of 4 months. And we did tie it so that if you live in your unit for less than 4 years, you would, it would be 3 months, 2 months, or 1 month's cash equivalent relocation benefit, or more time, 1 month if you'd only been there a year, 2 months, 2 years, 3 months, 3 years, and then 4 months for everything else.
So what if the landlord just wants to give notice and not offer money? Could they do that?
No, it's at the tenant's, as drafted, it's the tenant's choice.
They get time
Okay,
or
so
money.
my issue on that would be, in response to Member Daysog, if it's, what about considering, if you're talking about a mom and pop, small, however you define that, that then they would get to choose which it is as opposed to a corporate. And if it's a corporate, then it's up to the tenant to choose. What do you think about that? Treating them differently in regards to the relocation.
You're treating the tenants differently.
Yeah, so that if it's a big complex, then the tenant chooses,
I don't
which,
know.
no, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to define mom and pop. I mean, not every large complex is owned by a corporation. Some are owned by local folks that are
Also,
reasonable.
Sorry. Okay, so maybe this needs to just come back with the different options.
And also,
My
I'd be-
answer. Yeah. Okay, my answer to what Mayor Spencer indicated is, whatever straws that I can grasp at in order to help out the small mom and pops, and however we define it, rental structures of 6 units or less. I mean, I want to do that because I don't think we're quite grasping the severity of the economics of all this on them especially, and that it is a balance between helping out tenants by recognizing that small mom and pops are a significant housing provider in town.
Once again, I would just remind the council that the relocation benefits are strictly for no cause and no fault evictions. So it's for a landlord-initiated eviction that you would be required to pay relocation benefits. So if you knew you were going to do a family move-in, if you knew you were going to go out of the rental business, if you knew you were going to, you wanted to evict for no cause, that landlord-initiated action is what would trigger the payment of the relocation.
Okay, so on that issue,
and
well, I was going to suggest that when this comes back to us, that it offer two options, and we can get more feedback from the community.
And so what I was wanting to say earlier is that it may be absolutely true that so-called mom and pop landlords, but we haven't really defined that term, are less able to bear these expenses. But in the absence of some empirical data, how do we know that's true? How do we know they haven't managed their properties well and set aside strong reserves? And smaller buildings could have smaller maintenance costs. So I'm just cautioning.
Yeah.
So we can either
Well, and smaller buildings could be owned by corporations that are doing these mass evictions. So, I mean,
So do
I
you
don't know
want-
how you define mom and pop.
Well, somewhere along the line, there another jurisdiction was it? Is it in the materials in our packet? Somewhere I've read there is a definition that some jurisdiction used of what a mom and pop um, rental operation used. But again, all I'm saying is let's be careful about jumping to conclusions for which we don't have a basis in fact.
And if it's helpful for thinking about 2 to 4 unit complexes are the largest percentage of the city's rental houses.
Yeah, so we're basically going to exempt everybody from relocation if we exempt
No,
four or
no, it
lower.
wasn't exempting them. It was who's going to have the choice of whether it's time or
I thought
money or the in between.
I thought
So
the
what was
idea was exemption.
No,
Well, that's
no,
my
it's not
idea.
exempt. No, no, for me, it's not exemption. My position was, I was trying to figure out who's going to choose if it's 6 months or the money. And then I thought Member Daysog raised a good point that maybe your smaller landlord wouldn't be able to come up with the money.
Well, then they shouldn't
but-
do the eviction.
Okay, so then,
I mean,
the,
that's just
so
the-
my bigger, so
that's the price
one of
of-
my concerns was also in regards to length of tenancy. Where are we on that? Would that alter what is offered for relocation? Have you been there a year versus 5 years or 4 years?
I like what the ordinance says.
Okay,
I'm afraid that tying it to the length of tenancy will encourage landlords to get rid of long-term tenants.
okay, and I would agree with Vice Mayor on that, not to tie it to length of tenancy.
So just have a flat amount for everybody.
Yep.
And that would be the 4 months.
Yeah, it's the formula here.
I mean, I'm fine with that too. I mean, because we have to break the tie somewhere.
Should there be a
Okay.
1 year threshold for that to kick in? In other words, you have to be there 1 year before you get.
Before you get
time.
relocation?
Kind of like investing.
Well, so I would say no, because then that means they just brought in a tenant and they're going to do a no cause and no fault within the first year. What was the point of doing
Yeah, I
that
mean,
lease?
I mean, that's usually when you find out if someone's a problem too, though.
Oh, but this is
I
for
mean-
no cause and no fault.
If someone's a problem, then there's judicial means of getting them out. If this is truly no fault, if it's truly no fault, then the problem is, regardless of whether you've been there for 6 months or 10 years, it's hard to find a place to live. It's hard to uproot a family. So I don't think it's a hardship to give time in the notice. The hardship comes with where the money comes from if there's relocation that's provided. And that's why I like the idea of time, 4 months on top of the 60 days. So that's the notice that you have to give so that people are prepared. They can take less, but the remainder of whatever the settlement is to move that time frame shorter or whatever it's going to be, I think should be mediated between the tenant and the landlord. So there's not a dollar figure assigned to it, but there's an obligation to mediate so that you're not gouging people.
So that it's not the equivalent of 1 month's rent for each.
That's correct. That's my position.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's the difference. Okay, got it. I appreciate the clarification.
And I do think because we're creating a Byzantine ordinance here, it's convoluted and complex, and I would rather look at a simpler, more direct, basically our current process expanded to include certain eviction deliberations, excluding the ones that are covered by law, and it has some teeth in it, some recourse that someone can take if they're being abused by the system.
Okay.
No, my feeling is that we should have clear relocation benefits. I think anyone who does relocation benefits clarify it somehow, and to leave it to some process, I don't know. So I think we should fall on the side of clarity, and make sure to modify that, howsoever we must, but it should be clear as to, what the expectations are with regard to relocation benefits dollar-wise.
I,
So what do you
I,
So we have
think
to
I
about
pick,
the
agree.
we have to
1
pick
month?
one.
But I agree with Councilmember Dayside. I think the predictability is important, and also remember, this is also a form of disincentivizing frivolous evictions. So if it's known that look, you're going to have to pay these costs, some of them might not occur at all. And I just don't think we can throw it out to a mediation between the landlord and tenant because again, the playing field's not equal, and especially not level, and especially with the non-binding ground.
So staff's recommendation here is 1 month's rent for each month's stay. What about that dollar amount?
I
I'm
can-
fine with that.
You are fine with that?
I'm in.
Member Dayside?
I can live with it. I prefer something south of that. Everything that I see has 2 months worth of relocation plus $1,500. I see here we're having 4 months. I mean, I would have preferred 2 months or 3 months, but
Oh.
the 4 months worth. I think the saving grace is the fourth bullet point where, it can be exchanged for time. The only problem with that, though, is that's at the discretion of the renter, and I think somehow the landlord needs to be involved in that discussion.
Well, the tenant's the one that's either going to need the time or the money because they have to find a new place to live.
Yeah, well, from my vantage point, though,
And this is for no cause and no fault
yeah,
evictions
but
too.
still, from my vantage point, though, I still will continue to believe that there are small landlords who won't be able to pay 4 months worth of rent.
Well, they're going to
Okay,
have
so-
to make that decision not to evict or find a cause.
They might have a reason to evict, like, a family member has to move in ASAP because of medical.
That doesn't fall under one of these then.
Well,
The
you do
family member. is-
OMI,
It,
that's an OMI, yeah, owner move-in, sorry.
Yeah, there's an exception for the family move-in where you don't get that particular extension of time. It's only on the other no-fault issues.
That's it.
So we have to pick either everyone gets the same or we do the sliding scale.
I think that's
And-
the only issue that there's
Yeah.
not consensus on.
And just looking at the table that's in our materials of what other jurisdictions do, these amounts are substantially more than what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
Much more. And the other thing that gives me pause on some of these other relocation benefits is they add on additional charges for households with low income, elderly, disabled tenants, minor children. And you might think, well, why shouldn't you get more for that? But the Housing Authority executives would also tell you that that can cause landlords to not want to rent to households with those configurations. So I actually think the amount that the staff has come up with is reasonable. And if you add up the dollar figures of San Francisco, Berkeley, Santa Monica, Los Angeles, and even East Palo Alto was pretty steep. We're actually a little below some of those amounts, and they are fixed amounts.
But these are the 6, so I thought staff's recommendation is this month's and so.
It is as
are you-
opposed to just a flat rate. Okay,
Right.
You want it? So yeah,
I think we should just pick one of the two and
Well,
have
my-
a hand raise.
My druthers is to go with staff recommendation. That's what I prefer.
I would do that. Mr. Odie?
Well, I could go either way. I mean, if there
So
if there are two that want the one, then I guess we can make a decision. But
So you've got 2 that are saying staff's recommendation, which ties it to length of tenancy, and you've got 2 that are not.
okay, then I'll go with staff's recommendation.
And that ties it to length of tenancy.
Then I think that covers all of the points in the ordinance except